Order and welcome to another video in this series aimed at teaching you how to play Riftbound step by step, hopefully getting you ready for your first Nexus 9. In today's video, we are going to be playing another game of random deck review, and it is going to be Mel Midrange versus Worthy Prey Kha'Zix, or Kha'Zd. Let's see what those look like, and I will see you guys in a moment. We are now looking at the deck selection. We can see that the Mel Midrange is by Pratham Chauhan. I'm going to imagine that's how that's said. They are running Mel Defiant, they're running sprites, they're probably running more sprites of some sort. Let's see. No more sprites, interesting. Triple rebuttal. I was thinking of rebuke, sorry. Fizzers, Plundering Poros, Travelling Merchants, so it seems like a very standard blue-purple, which is really exciting, and their chosen battlefields are also pretty standard. Let's go for a Zorn Warrens first. Over to Worthy Prey Kha'Zd by the Bacon G. We have mainboarding Decree of Strength, which is a really interesting decision, and if it wasn't against Mel, but instead something like Vex, these would be dead cards. It is important to note that technically it says they reveal their hand and you choose a mind card from it. So if they don't have a mind card, it is just a free look at their hand, which is kind of interesting. Which explains why it's mainboarded, I should emphasize. Onslaught, really nice to see. It's an underutilized spell because while it is really strong and it has flow, it's quite expensive. We have even more bolster, your classic purple cards. Up from the Deep is a nice addition as well, and we see Akshan in the main as well, which is, gear is always prevalent in some way or another, so maybe this comes in handy. As for the rest of the units, Zed, Rangar, Mr. Root, just some pretty stable cards. And their chosen battlefields are Sandswept Tomb, which I was not expecting, Zorn Warrens as well, and Forbidding Waste. So the Kha'Zix will choose to go first, both battlefields are the same. Opening hand for Kha'Zix is not great. We will see the Fizz go. And we'll keep the Up from the Deep because that might be handy soon. We do get a 2-drop Goas. As for the Mel, great opening hand. So for the Kha'Zix, we are using the Unleashed Alt Art runes. And as we pass over to the Mel, we can see are using the Origins Alt Art runes. We will now flick over to the spectator's screen where everything is nice and tidy, and we'll see for 2 energy the Mel brings out her own Travelling Merchant. Now she isn't going to burn the stacked deck 1 energy because there may be a situation where rebuttal becomes more important, and we can always use stacked deck on the engage into this battlefield if they so wish. We now pass over to the Kha'Zix, who pulls out their second Rangar Trophy Hunt, which is terrifying to see because that essentially just gives you 2 guaranteed conquers in your opponent's turn, especially when paired with easy ways to increase their might, which maybe we'll see. Anyway, the Travelling Merchant will now move in, and their move trigger will go on the chain first. They will choose to discard of everything the Up from the Deep and draw 1. That will now resolve. A showdown begins in which both players can choose an action they would like to perform, and the Kha'Zix is going to pass, and at action speed the Mel is going to play stacked deck. Looking at the top 3 cards, we can see stacked deck comes out, a Bellows Breath again, and a Rebuke. Of these 3 options, generally you're going to pull the stacked deck out. While the Rebuke is really nice to see, it's also very expensive, and I'm interested to see how in a regular game you would ignore this cost without having an applied researcher already out. So the stacked deck will come to hand and that will resolve, and the Mel will pass priority back over the Kha'Zix, who will score to 1. Because of the conquer trigger, they must now put Zorn Warrens onto the chain, which says when you conquer here, discard 1, then draw 1. And we're going to see that they're going to get rid of the Mr. Root and draw into a Z without a sound. Then for 1, 2, 3, they're going to play out Lucian. And they are going to pass over to the Mel, who draws into a Stupefy. They see that the Kha'Zix only has 1 rune up. They're thinking, well, it could be a punch first quite conveniently, but also I can just counter that with my own rebuttal. So I am going to begin by stupefying for 1 energy your traveling merchant, and the Kha'Zix has no response, and so it is reduced down to 1 might, and the draw resolves. The Mel is going to see that they drew into a Sprite Fountain, which is an incredibly powerful gear to see this early, because we could move it into this battlefield, kill the Traveling Merchant and conquer to 1, and then we can move our own Traveling Merchant and conquer to 2, and have 2 runes remaining for the opponent's turn, which just so happens to be enough for a rebuttal and a stacked deck, or a Ride the Wind and a rebuttal, or a stacked deck. So we've got a few combinations here. So we'll tap to recycle 1. So it does mean we cannot play the Bellows Breath anymore because we have no mind rooms. But that's okay, because on the play trigger of Sprite Fountain, you make a sprite, and then when it dies, you repeat that effect. The sprite will now move in as a 3 to their 1, and there is no response from the Kha'Zix, and so the Mel will win that combat, scoring to 1. The Conquer trigger will go on the chain, in which we will get rid of the Bellows Breath, and we'll draw into a Fizz. What we could do at this stage is we could use the stacked deck in order to look for another card that we wouldn't mind losing to the discard trigger. But we kind of almost thinking Ride the Wind won't be too bad to lose, and so we'll move in and we'll trigger the move ability, especially because we have Fizz. Losing Ride the Wind isn't the end of the world, and we'll draw 1. And then we will pass priority. There is no response from the Kha'Zix, and so the Mel will score to 2, and they'll actually get rid of that Traveling Merchant they just drew and draw into a smoke screen, which is very powerful but cannot be used currently because no blue runes. They will then pass their turn over to Kha'Zix, who draws into the punch first, a little late, but better late than never. And they've got an option on their mind. They could, if they wished, play out the Rangar Trophy Hunter straight from hand and choose to conquer this battlefield with the Sprite. Then they'd be able to move they'd on conquer, probably discard the Void Assault maybe, or the other Rangar, because, well, hard to say. Zed without a sound is very strong. But in response to these two, it's just the same costs with less results, really. So for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, recycle 1, we will take over this battlefield. There is no response from the Mel because they cannot afford a smokescreen, but what they will do is they will tap stacked deck and look at the top 3 cards of their main deck. They see it's a Stupefy, which will do nothing in this situation, a Flash, which they can no longer afford, and a Turn to Dust, which, you know, they're the only one that has gear at the moment, so that makes no sense. Of these 3, however, we are going to put the Flash to hand, recycle the rest. That will resolve, and this sprite will die. Next, the Conquer ability for Renekton will be put on the chain of Zorn Warrens, and they will choose to discard the Z and draw into a Rebuke, which, you know what, fair enough. Then the Lucian will move into this combat and target the Traveling Merchant, and this is where the Stupefy would have been very nice, but also we would have burnt ourselves out of having the required runes for rebuttal, so it's a bit of a gamble on that one. And the alternative obviously is not to have played the stacked deck to begin with and have just had the rebuttal in hand anyway. But then that will be a pass and the Traveling Merchant will die. The Lucian, will score for the Kha'Zix up to 3, and because the Kha'Zix actually partook in 2 combats this turn, they get 1 experience for each combat win. There is no other triggers to worry about. Oh yes, there is. The Lucian now becomes readied, and they must discard and draw for the trigger of the Zorn Warrens at the Lucian's battlefield. So I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything. Discarded the sprite, discarded the trail. Yep, cool. So we've got to now discard and draw. And we're actually going to choose to discard the Rebuke and draw into an Up from the Deep. Alright, so that's going to be a nice choice next time. Then the Lucian will move back, and then we'll exhaust the Kha'Zix and spend 2 experience in order to bring an exhausted unit from battlefield to base. That will move back, and the Kha'Zix will pass over to the Mel, whose Sprite Fountain at beginning phase will trigger. The Sprite will now move into the Zorn Warrens. There is no response from the Kha'Zix, and so the Mel will score to 3, and then they will have to discard 1, draw 1. We're going to see the Flash be... actually, yeah, the Flash will be discarded and will draw into the Stupefy. Next, we will see for 3, recycle 1, the Fizz played. And Fizz will choose to play from the trash. Well, we've got the option of the stacked deck, really, or the Ride the Wind for a 1 power. I think we'll do the stacked deck, just keep the flow going. We don't have to pay anything extra for that. And we see another Smoke Screen, which we don't need, another Ride the Wind we don't need, and a Thousand Tail Watcher, which may actually become very important soon. And so we'll put that one to hand, recycle the rest, and now stacked deck will go to the bottom of the deck. And for 3 runes remaining, the Mel will pass over to the Kha'Zix, who draws into a Star-Crossed. Now, if they Star-Crossed the Sprite, they will just return one of their units back to hand, and the Sprite will disappear. They don't want to do it to the Fizz, because that's exactly the kind of benefit that Fizz is after in some ways. But the Rengar is going to move into this battlefield. A showdown will begin. The Rengar will pass priority over to the Mel, who is going to begin by tapping 2, recycling 1 to play Ride the Wind, targeting their Sprite over to the Zorn Warrens. The Rengar is going to respond by tapping 3, recycling 1 in order to play Star-Crossed, and they're going to target that Sprite and their own Lucian. And in response, for pay 1 energy, recycle 1 power, they're going to play Rebuttal. Now, the interesting thing about Rebuttal is we can actually take control of Rebuttal, and it says if you do, gain control of it, and you may make new choices for it. There has been a bit of discussion on what the requirements are for a card such as Star-Crossed, in which do you get to make, if you choose to make new choices, have to make choices for both actions, or can they choose to only adjust the friendly unit to a different friendly unit? And while in these circumstances it isn't as of importance, there are some cards where you may not want to change one of the choices, such as currently the enemy unit in the eyes of the card is the Sprite, and the friendly unit in the eyes of the card is the Rengar, but by taking control of it and making new choices, as far as I'm aware, the rules apply that technically the card was valid, and just by adjusting which two are given the tags, so Sprite is friendly, Rengar is enemy, the card continues to be valid. Therefore, if you were to make a new choice, you could not choose the Rengar and the Lucian because that's 2 enemies. So we will pay 1 more power in order to take control of that, and there is no response from the Rengar because they have no reaction speed cards that they can pay for, and so that will resolve, and the Star-Crossed will no longer be targeting the Sprite and the Rengar, but for the Lucian they'll be targeting the Fizz and the Lucian. The reason we don't want to target the Rengar in this circumstance is because while the Rengar is very powerful, the reaction speed means that he will just come back. And by moving the Sprite over here, sure, they get a conquer, but so do we, and by moving the Lucian back, we prevent them from being able to re-engage with that Lucian. Now, that will resolve, and the Fizz will come back to hand, and the Lucian will come back to the hand of the Kha'Zix. The Ride the Wind will now resolve, with the Sprite moving to this battlefield and being readied, and will now resolve that card as well. Rengar will now conquer that battlefield and have to trigger the conquer ability, discarding Up from the Deep and drawing into a Travelling Merchant, and the showdown for the Zorn Warrens begins, in which the Mel will pass priority over to the Rengar, who unfortunately cannot do anything at reaction or action speed, and so the priority will pass, and the Mel will score 2/4, discarding a smoke screen and drawing into a Temporal Breach. Next we have the Kha'Zix gets the rest of their turn, and they have a few options. They could actually, if they so wished, play out the Traveling Merchant, and then use Void Assault in order to move. Hypothetically, we bring out the Traveling Merchant, then we could use the Void Assault targeting the Traveling Merchant and move it into the Zorn Warrens, and then use the enemy target of the Void Assault and move the sprite back to its base. That is because it does not require that the movement of the enemy unit be to the same location, but it does specify if they both move to a battlefield you don't control, you are the attacker. That is one play they could do. An alternative adjustment is they just bring out the Lucian. They accept the fact that Mel will score to 4 but will not score to 5 because the sprite is temporary, and they'll be at 4 runes and they know of the Fizz's existence, and that is it. With that in mind, they're like, well, yeah, no, you put yourself in a very awkward position. Technically, I did win a combat against the sprite because it was... they haven't adjusted the rules as far as I'm aware regarding the requirement for a unit to have died. It just no longer needs to be at the battlefield you're at. Therefore, the Kha'Zix scores 1 point for the combat, and they will pass, 1 experience for the combat. The sprite will now die, and for 2, a Traveling Merchant will come out, and they will pass over to the Rangar, who will score to 5 for holding with the Rangar Trophy Hunter. They'll move that back. They will then pay 1 energy in order to play Decree of Strength, allowing them to look at the opponent's hand and recycle a mind card from it. They're going to look and see Temporal Breach, Fizz, Thousand Tail Watcher, and Stupefy, and they think that that Thousand Tail Watcher needs to be recycled, and that will now resolve. Next, the Lucian will move into the non-conquered battlefield this turn, and they will pass priority over to the Mel, who is going to pass priority back, and they will score to 6. They will choose to discard the Traveling Merchant and draw into a Star-Crossed, and they knew what was in the opponent's hand, and they know that there's nothing that they can do about what's about to happen, so they tap 3, recycle 1, and they are going to Star-Crossed their Lucian and the opponent's Tahm Kench. The Mel is going to tap 1 to stupefy the opponent's Lucian, and that will resolve, and they will draw 1, and they draw unfortunately into a Wages of Pain, which is not enough, and so they will pass priority, and that will now resolve for the opponent. And the Rangar will now come back to hand. Was it the Rangar? No, sorry, it was the Lucian now comes back to hand, and so does the Traveling Merchant. And the Kha'Zix with 4 energy remaining will pay 3 in order to play that Lucian back out and pass. The reason we did that is because we realized that the Mel is in such dire straits that they are essentially gambling on finding a card that they can use. They do find a Sprite Fountain, which will allow them to put 1 unit out on the field, and so for 2 recycle 1, they will play out the Sprite Fountain. They will be able to play out that Sprite and move it to the Zorn Warrens, in which the Kha'Zix will not respond, and they will go to 5. Then for 1 power, they're going to hide a card at that battlefield, being the Temporal Breach, and then they are going to pass. The reason we did the Temporal Breach is because that will allow us to, for some reason, just be able to replay the sprite and kind of scare the opponent in some ways. It's a bit of a bluff because we need Wages of Pain in order to kill the Lucian, and if the Lucian doesn't move into this battlefield, because it'll most likely be the 6 might, not the 3 might, we need to be able to kill the Lucian over there. It is now the Kha'Zix's turn, in which they will begin by tapping 2 in order to play out an Irresistible Feyfolk. Then they'll play out Void Assault for 2 more recycle 1, targeting the Irresistible Feyfolk and moving it to the Zorn Warrens. And they will choose to move the sprite to the base first, and that will resolve. The movement of the Irresistible Feyfolk will now go on the chain, and what will occur is the Temporal Breach will target the sprite, and the sprite will be replayed, meaning it is no longer targeted by the Void Assault, but the move trigger of the Irresistible Feyfolk will now drag the sprite over to this battlefield regardless. It is a 1, 2, 3, so for 1, 2, 3, 4 recycle one, a Kha'Zix will come out to this battlefield, and it will be a put up to 6 might because the enemy is alone, attacking or defending it checks 4, and therefore the sprite will die, and the Irresistible Faithwick will die. The Kha'Zix will score to 7. They will gain an additional 2 experience for that combat, plus 1, so 2 for the trigger of the Kha'Zix and 1 for the winning of the combat. And they will now discard the Rangar Trophy Hunter and draw into a Mr. Root. Then they will move their Rangar Trophy Hunter over to this battlefield, in which the Mel can only respond by wages of paining that Rangar. That Rangar will take 3 damage, that will now resolve, and the Rangar will conquer to 8, ending the round. Now that was a really intense game 1. I think that the Mel struggled to find their footing in the first part of the game, and then they kind of continued to spiral out of control. That comes with a bit of experience with me having a bit more experience with Kha'Zix, even though I play Mel, because this is a different type of Mel. This reminds me more similar to Alan's Mel, with some interesting changes that need to be made. So we're getting rid of the Turn to Dust, and we're going to look at the alternative options. Hard Bargain would do great, so we'll bring in a Hard Bargain. The Bellows Breath isn't going to do much, so we'll get rid of that and bring in a second Hard Bargain. Having our own Kha'Zix would be really interesting. The reduction in might values might be fun, but it's quite expensive for an already expensive deck. The Vex Apathetic would be an incredible addition, actually, to stop the opponent's Rangars. And we'll get rid of a Temporal Breach. No, we'll get rid of a Starcrossed in return for it. And the real big addition I might want to make is the Kha'Zix Mutating Horror. However, I don't see what I'd want to get rid of in turn for it. Maybe actually 2 Fizzes for 2 Kha'Zix, and we'll just see how it feels. The next battlefield will be Targon's Peak, because we will be running the going first. As for the Kha'Zix, Gust would be really strong as a way to stop those sprites from quickly moving in. Hard Bargain would be really effective as a way to stop those Mel later on, especially when they've only got 1 mana kind of turns. Onslaught we don't need to worry about. In fact, I'll actually bring out the other copy of Onslaught. Up from the Deep was interesting, but I don't need to worry about it too much. They didn't run any gear. They ran the Sprite Fountains, but that's all the gear they ran, so I don't need to worry about taking it, because that's very expensive for taking it, when in reality we can just ignore it. And Vex Apathetic could be the go. I'm actually going to bring in Furor Peerless, and I might even bring in 2 copies of Furor Peerless, and take out the 1 copy of Rebuke, and that way we can see how that feels. Now their second battlefield, because they are going second, is going to be Sandswept Tomb. Forbidding Waste seems like an interesting choice, but I'm going to ignore it for now. Mel will choose to go first. Their mulligan looks miserable, and they're going to get rid of the Temporal Breach and the Flash in hopes of finding, well, they got something at least. And the mulligan for the Lucian is, the Kha'Zix is looking really good. Turn 1 Lucian, always really nice thing to do. And so, unfortunately, no Mind Runes for the Mel, so they're going to tap 1 in order to play out stacked deck. Look at the top 3 cards, see a Travelling Merchant, see the Rebuttal. This is actually a really hard situation, because next turn, if we don't burn any runes, we can actually play out the Vex Apathetic. But the Rebuttal is so good, we kind of have to put that one to hand and recycle the rest, and that will resolve. And we will pass over to the Kha'Zix, who, for their first turn, they could play out the Decree of Strength. So actually for 2 we'll play out the Mr. Root, and then for 1 we'll play out the Decree of Strength. We will now look at the opponent's hand. We see 2 Mind cards from it. It is worth noting that this is a mixed card, and I don't know if it counts as both. I'm going to say it would actually in this situation. And so for the Mel, they could choose to, if they wish, actually choose to rebuttal the Decree of Strength in order to prevent them taking this. But then at the same time, well, they're going to take it anyway, so why would you spend the 1 energy, 1 power? And so they'll allow that to pass, and the enemy will choose to get rid of the rebuttal back to the bottom of the deck, and that will resolve. And we will now pass, and it is going over to the Mel, and we'll go to the spectator screen where we can continue our coverage. We have the Mel's turn for 4. They'll bring out the Vex Apathetic and they will pass over to the Kha'Zix, who is going to begin by moving their Mr. Root to Targon's Peak and choosing to ready the last 2 runes. Then, because they moved to a battlefield, they will gain 2 experience. We'll just add that now. So technically they shouldn't tell them which 2 they'll ready because it's not conquered yet. But there is no response from either party, and so they'll conquer to 1 point. Then for 1, 2, 3, they'll bring out the Lucian Merciless. And then at the end of their turn, they'll bring ready up 2 runes and pass. It is now the Mel's turn, and they have a few options. They could either move to the battlefield with Mr. Root, but they know that the Kha'Zix has 2 experience and could have brought it back if he really wanted to. They see the 4 runes up and they know that that Kha'Zix can come out as a 6, and they have no way to really stop that besides rebuking it back to their owner's hand. Which kind of tells them that, well, the thing they actually have to do first is tap 3 in order to Wages of Pain Mr. Root. Because if they don't Wages of Pain Mr. Root, and the opponent they move in, they would be able to play Kha'Zix to a battlefield they have units at. In response to this, for 3 recycle 1, for 4 recycle 1, they will play Kha'Zix to this battlefield preemptively, and the Wages of Pain will resolve, killing the Mr. Root. Now I could have actually played out Starcrossed, but then they would be targeting their Mr. Root anyway, and the Vex Apathetic would just probably have set around for next turn, and they know the Sprite Fountain exists, so they were probably not going to control that battlefield regardless. Anyway, for the Mel, they make a gold for that, and they see the Kha'Zix has come out, and they could now rebuke it if they so wished. Or they could just not, and they could choose to go to the other battlefield and hold their 3 runes for a hard bargain. They are only 1 point behind, but if they allow this to stale, they go up to 2 points. They see the Lucian in the back line, and so they're really tossing up on what they can do this turn. They know that if they were to rebuke the Kha'Zix back to hand, well, what's going to happen? It's going to go back to hand, the Lucian's going to come in, the Kha'Zix is going to come out as a 6 might, killing the Vex immediately. Actually, no, it couldn't, because this would stun it, which means it'd be purely reliant on the Lucian. But also the number of might increasing spells that we saw last turn, or last game, kind of does tell me that, or at least they could move with Void Assault the Kha'Zix, the Vex back. And so it's kind of a gamble in some ways on what to do and what is the correct play. I think we actually move the Vex Apathetic to the Sandswept Tomb, and there is no response, and so they'll score 2-1. And then they'll consider holding the Rebuke for their own unit instead. Because they could Sprite Fountain in order to put a Sprite at this battlefield as well, and ensure that if the Lucian did move in, that they couldn't also, well actually the Kha'Zix is still over here, so the biggest thing they're worried about is a Lucian with a punch first going up to 8, and that would, yeah, no, we'll just hold on to the hard bargain for now and just hope that it's enough and pass over to the Kha'Zix, who will score to 2. And the Kha'Zix is going to begin by tapping 2 to play out a hard Travelling Merchant. Now they could do one of 2 things. They could either play out the Starcross, targeting the Travelling Merchant and the Vex Apathetic, because we've got to remind ourselves that that Travelling Merchant is now exhausted. Or they could move in and punch first, and they're just going to do that. They're going to say, hey, look, I'm going to move in, tap 1 energy, recycle 2 body runes, and punch first this unit. Then this will go up to 8, and that will resolve. The Mel could have hard bargained, but they know that they can afford it. Why are they worried? And so the Mel is going to go, well, unfortunately for me, I've got to do it. I've got to tap 2, recycle 2, and I'm going to rebuke your Lucian. At reaction speed, the Kha'Zix is going to tap through recycle 1 in order to Starcrossed, targeting the Vex and targeting the... Oh, actually, would they even bother? Here's an interesting question. So we'll reverse that a little bit. Would they, in this circumstance, use the Star-Crossed in order to target the Lucian, or maybe the Traveling Merchant, or even the Kha'Zix, in order to put the Vex back to hand? Because if they actually chose the Kha'Zix and the Vex, the Rebuke would still go through, which means we're not conquering this battlefield regardless. And instead, if we allow the Lucian to come back to hand, we can play it this turn, and the next turn we can move in 2 units and have access to the Star-Crossed to remove it instead of that turn. And so that will be allowed to resolve. The Lucian will come back to hand, and the Kha'Zix is going to move the Kha'Zix Mutating Horror back to base, and they are going to pass their turn over to the the Mel, who's going to score to 2. They draw into another Thousand Tail Watcher, which is uncomfortable, but for 2 and the gold, they'll play out the Sprite Fountain, which will bring out a Sprite, which will move into Targon's Peak, and they will score to 3. They are then going to pass their turn, readying 2 runes at the end of it, and they see the Kha'Zix there. And that Kha'Zix is pretty scary, and they're just going to say, hey look, I'm going to say you can do it. Also, we forgot to play the Lucian back to the base of the Kha'Zix. That's my bad. So I'm going to pull him back and not lose the Vex unnecessarily, and we'll pass. It is now the Kha'Zix's turn, and they see that they've got a Sprite here, they've got the Sprite coming next turn, we've got access to 2 Star-Crossed, but we still know that Thousand Tail Watcher is in hand, and being able to return a Thousand Tail Watcher to hand when it becomes the quintessential moment is going to be so much more powerful. We'll begin by moving the Kha'Zix into this battlefield and passing priority. The Kha'Zix now, because it is attacking an alone unit, will go up to 6 and gain 2 experience. And the Mel will lose the Sprite, and the Kha'Zix will score 1 point and gain an additional experience for winning a combat this turn. They will then move the Traveling Merchant, and on the move trigger, they will have to discard and draw. They're going to discard the Rista Root and draw into a stacked deck. They will now pass the turn over to the Mel, who will have no response, and so they'll score to 4. They'll then tap 1 in order to play the stacked deck, see an Irresistible Faefolk, a Rengar Trophy Hunter, and another Decree. Unfortunately, we want to see the Decree, but we also really like the Rengar, and so we're going to put the Rengar to hand, recycle the rest, and that will now pass. The reason we like seeing the Rengar so much is we have enough runes for it, and it means that if they choose to send the Mel along with the Sprite into this battlefield, we can actually defend it quite handedly. And we will now pass over to the Vex, who will lose the Sprite Fountain, and a Sprite will be made. The Kha'Zix will go back down to 4 might, and for 1, 2, 3, we're going to see a Wages of Pain targeting the Kha'Zix, and the Kha'Zix is going to have no response, and so the Kha'Zix will take 3 damage. Now, if we send the Sprite in, it'll be 3 against 6, but because the Kha'Zix has already taken 3 damage, it means it will die. We have access to enough runes to double wager, double hard bargain, meaning that they cannot afford to play anything this turn. And so we'll move in, the Kha'Zix will go up to a 6 and gain 2 experience, and the Sprite will target the Kha'Zix, and the Kha'Zix will respond by tapping 5, recycling 1 to play a Rengar Trophy Hunter to this battlefield, and the Mel is going to go, cool, I'm still killing the Kha'Zix, and so the Kha'Zix will die, the Sprite will die, and then for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we are going to bring out a Mel Defiant Soul, and we're not going to choose to empower it. We have no access to flow cards at the moment, and neither does the opponent, so I'm not too worried about that. I was thinking, should we bring out this empower and banish the Traveling Merchant? But we're not too worried just yet about what's about to happen. While having a Mel here would be very handy, we've got to remind ourselves that this is a terrifying unit. Maybe we do go in. I think we go in, and a fight begins, and that will resolve with the Kha'Zix dying. Oh, sorry, the Trailing Merchant dying on the Kha'Zix and the Mel scoring a point. And then we just pass and we say, hey, look, you will now score to 5 points. My Mel is at a battlefield. You need to find a way to get rid of it. And by doing that, the Kha'Zix is going to tap 3, recycle 1 to Starcrossed, and target their Rangar and the opponent's Vex. That will resolve. And the Lucian will move into this battlefield, scoring to 6 this turn, readied and moved back. And then for 4 runes remaining, there's not much they can do besides tap this, spend 1 in order to buff the Lucian up to 4, and pass and say, hey look, congrats, I'm going to be at 6 points, you're going to have to figure something out. The Mel is going to move to Targon's Peak, and at reaction speed, the Kha'Zix could, if they so wished, play Starcrossed, but they're playing the long game. They're playing for the win next turn by keeping the Lucian around, and so Starcrossed doesn't work for that. The Mel will score to 5 points, and they'll elect to ready the last 2 runes at the end of this turn. For 1, 2, 3, 4, they are going to bring out Vex Apathetic, which means that Rangar cannot be played at this battlefield. And they know that the Kha'Zix is going to go up to 8 runes next turn. And so if they spend 5 on the Rangar, that'll relieve them with 3. And there's only a handful of things they can afford for 3, but the most terrifying of them is actually Punch First. And so we need to be mindful of that and maybe keep enough for a Ride the Wind in order to fight the opponent at the battlefield that they don't go. So if the Lucian moves in here, an 8 to this 4, plus another 6 of the Rangar will be a total of 10 to 8. So we'll need a way to increase our might by 2. Unfortunately for us, there's not much we can do to do that. And so the next best thing we can do is actually possibly Ride the Wind our Mel over to here. Oh, no, it's a very awkward position, unfortunately. Because if we do that and move the Mel over here and score to 6, and that resolves, it's worth noting, by the way, that it did not choose here, it chose at the other location, and it resolved here, which means we do not get, are not allowed to pay the reduced price. But now we'll increase that by 2 and pass and say, hey look, you cannot bring up that Rangar at reaction speed because the Vex is here. In response, the Lucian is going to tap 3, recycle 1 to play Starcrossed, targeting... Actually, they're not going to play that just yet. Oh no, it broke. The way that was going to end, this means that I accidentally pressed backspace when I shouldn't have. Because for some reason, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The Lucian was going to move into the battlefield with the Vex, and then at reaction speed we would have seen the Rangar played to this battlefield, and then it would be stunned but could not move, and the Starcrossed would have returned the Vex and the Lucian to hand, pushing them up to 7 at this battlefield. And the response would have been Hard Bargain, moving into on the side of the Mel, meaning that they could not have afforded to Starcrossed and Rangard. And so the response would have had to have been their own Hard Bargain, stopping them from playing the Rangar to begin with. So unfortunately for the Kha'Zix, there was no real way out of that one. And while I get this set back up, it is going to go to a Game 3. Now we are back, making sure everything's working. Yep, we'll go over to the mulligan. I did accidentally swap these two, so we're going to have to redo the sideboards as well, but I mean, for Game 3, we've now got to ask ourselves, what was so powerful about that Mel, and what can we do to stop it in the future? Well, we had the one Fiora in, we had, maybe we need a Vex of our own, we can lose the Akshan. Having more than just a handful of units would be very powerful, and so I think we'll lose the Onslaught, and we'll add an Up from the Deep. We'll keep the Hard Bargain of our own, and we'll lose the Rebuke. And the last battlefield will be the Forbidding Waste. As for the Mel, Double Hard Bargain was great, same with our Vex Apathetic. Having our own Kha'Zix may actually be the way to go, so we'll add those two as well, and we'll lose the Double Bellows Breath, we will lose the Rebuke of our own, and we'll lose the 2 Temporal Breaches, because while I see the benefit of it, we'll lose the Turn to Dust, keep a Temporal Breach, lose a Traveling Merchant, keep the other Temporal Breach, because I see what it wants to do, and I'm willing to give it another go. Rockfall Path, so, and we'll move in, and the Kha'Zix gets to go first. And we will see the opening hand for Kha'Zix will be good if they were going second. We've got to lose an Up from the Deep, and we'll just lose an Up from the Deep and hope we get damn it. As for the Mel going second, great stacked deck to see, hard bargain. We kind of like this hand, we're going to keep it. And for the first turn of Kha'Zix, they do draw into a Irresistible Fey Folk, which is very good. Then for the Mel, they'll stacked deck, look at the top 3 cards, see that one is a Traveling Merchant. But they kind of... It's hard to say, because we kind of almost want to play the Kha'Zix Mutating Horror in this matter, just because we would be able to surprise the Irresistible Fey Folk. Sorry about that. Have some food that I need to stop neglecting. But also, we play the Traveling Merchant. It gets targeted by the Irresistible Fey Folk immediately. And if that occurs, there's a very good chance that the Kha'Zix will just bring out their Mutating Horror next turn anyway, because they have the 1 Chaos Rune, which means they guarantee themselves being able to afford it. Which means of these choices, it's actually best to bring out the Kha'Zix Mutating Horror, recycle the rest, and then for 2 runes, just pass, unfortunately. And that's because while playing a 2-drop at this moment would be great, it's almost certainly going to die. The Irresistible Fey Folk will move over to the... If we move here, we limit ourselves greatly, but if the opponent had played a card... Just make sure, yep, cool. If the opponent had played a card, it would actually be the Surprise Defender, so it would be -2, which means that no, the Traveling Merchant would be dead immediately. If we move here, we cannot ambush, which means we cannot protect our Irresistible Fey Folk. But moving here at least means it's not going to be a 0 might. So we'll move here, and there is no response from the Mel, and so we'll score to 1, and then we'll tap 3 to bring out our Lucian, and then we'll pay 1 in order to play out the Decree of Strength. We'll look at the opponent's hand. There is only 1 Mind Rune, and so this will now be recycled. That will now be resolved, and we'll move over to the spectator screen, in which we will see the game continue. Over to Mel, who draws into a Stupefy. They will begin by tapping 1. Well, actually, we could either pay 1 and Stupefy immediately the Irresistible Fey Folk, or we could tap 4 and bring out the Kha'Zix. And I think we're going to do that. And we'll pass, because while we could ambush with the Kha'Zix, we can't ambush to Rockfall Path, so it doesn't make sense. As for the Kha'Zix, they are going to get a 2nd point, and they've actually seen their Fura Peerless, which is very nice. So they'll tap 3, recycle 1, bring out the Fura Peerless, they'll move into the Forbidding Waste, there is no response from the Mel, so they'll score to 3, and then bring back both of their units, and then they'll pass. Actually no, they'll tap 2, bring out Mr. Root, and then they'll pass. And they'll say, hey look, congrats, I've got a massive board of units, what can you do about that? The Mel is going to move their Kha'Zix into the Forbidding Waste and score to 1. Then they are going to tap to recycle 1 in order to ride the window over to the Rockfall Path, score to 2, and then move it back, score to 2, sorry. We are now going to see for 3, recycle 1, a Fizz played out, and they will target the stacked deck, allowing them to look at the top 3 cards of their main deck. And, of these options, Sprite Fountain, I mean none of them can be played immediately, but Sprite Fountain seems to be the best card. Plundering Pro would have also been very good, but we're not too worried about that right now. And we will pass. It is now the Kha'Zix's turn, An Irresistible Fae Folk would be very good at pulling in the Fizz and having it square up against the Kha'Zix. So we'd have to move to this battlefield, and the Fizz would be a 1, this would be a 1, so we couldn't save the Irresistible Fae Folk, but we could instead use the Fiora Peerless, move them both to Rockfall Path. This would go to a 6, this would stay at a 3, meaning that in the worst case scenario of a Stupefy or a Rebuttal, it doesn't really matter. So for 2, recycle a purple, Void Assault targeting the Fiora and the Fizz, and we'll move them both to that battlefield. That will resolve. The Fiora is attacking solo, and because it is Rockfall Path, there is nothing the Mel can do. They'll just tap 1 in order to stupefy the Fiora, draw a card, see it's a Starcross. The Fiora will go down to 5, but they'll still win the combat, securing themselves a buff while they are at it, and the Fizz will die, and the Kha'Zix will score to 4. Now, to get rid of that Kha'Zix mutating horror, it's going to be a little harder. We will first move Mr. Root in, and the movement will score them to 2 more experience, and then they'll actually score to 5 points. And then they'll exhaust the Kha'Zix and pay 2 to bring the Fiora back, and then pay 5 in order to bring out the Z without a sound. And they're just going to pass and they're going to say, hey look, I don't need to worry about your Kha'Zix, you need to worry about what I've got going on. And they're not wrong. The Mel is going to respond by moving the Kha'Zix mutating horror into this battlefield, going to 6, and scoring themselves 2 experience for the trigger. The Mr. Root will die, and the Mel will score to 3. They are then going to tap to recycle 1 to bring out a Sprite Fountain, making a Sprite which will move over to the Rockfall Path and score to 4. The issue for the Mel is that the Kha'Zix is going to score to 7, or they're just going to score to 6 and continue creating a very large battlefield base of units to conquer both battlefields with later. And in the best case scenario, they're giving them only 1 more turn to recover. Well, actually, in the best case scenario, they're giving them 2 turns because they realize that they need to bolster even further because they only have 1 card to their name. But with a Z, a Fiora, an Irresistible Illusion, and a Kha'Zix next turn on ambush to the Forbidding Waste, it's not looking very good for the Mel. So, with 4 runes remaining, while they are feeling confident, they're not feeling that confident. And so they're going to pay 1 in order to hide a Wages of Pain at that battlefield. And they're just going to have to pass and hope that it's enough to stem the bleeding a little bit. The Kha'Zix draws into a Starcross, and they're going to see the fact that, well, the Sprite is next to a hidden card, and the only 2 hidden cards we know of that the opponent is currently playing is a Temporal Breach, which would counter the Starcross, or a Wages of Pain. Last time it was a Wages of Pain. This time, we don't know. And are we willing to find out? Not so much, really. The alternative is they just run in, and if it's a Temporal Breach, they kill it. If it's Wages of Pain, they just need 7 might. And the Fiora, they will begin by exhausting the Kha'Zix and paying 1 energy in order to buff their Fiora up to 4. They will then move their Fiora in, and because it's attacking or defending alone, it will be doubled up to 8. And the Mel is going to reveal the Wages of Pain, targeting their own Sprite, in which they will create a gold, the Sprite will die, and the Fiora will score up to 6. Now they don't need to worry, they know that if they kill that Kha'Zix, they are in a very good position. But why do they need to kill it when they can just tap 3, recycle 1, hit Starcross to that, and their Irresistible Fae Folk, in which the Mel is going to respond by counting the number of runes, seeing the 1 card, realizing no matter what they do, that can be afforded, and so they'll choose to, for themselves, play their own Starcross targeting their own Kha'Zix and the opponent's Z. But unfortunately for them, for 2 runes, a hard bargain comes out, which will fizzle the Mel's Starcrossed, meaning that the Kha'Zix will be returned to hand, but the opponent only loses 1 unit rather than 2 units, which was the purpose of that play. Then the Kha'Zix will move their Z without a sound and their Lucian over this battlefield, scoring 2-7, and they will end their turn by for 2 playing out the Irresistible Fae Folk and passing. By the way, the Fiora won a combat, so they get a point. It is now the Mel's turn. If they do not clear both battlefields this turn, they will lose, and unfortunately there is nothing they can do about this. While a sprite does come out and they can use this sprite, they cannot, the Fiora is currently a 4, so they cannot use the Wages of Pain. Sorry, I just realized you can't see what they drew. They cannot use the Wages of Pain to kill the Fiora, and they cannot use the Kha'Zix to kill the Fiora because they require the Kha'Zix to come to this battlefield in order to attempt at clearing this out. But even then it would be 3 and a 4 against an 8, so it'd be 7 against 8, and because we did not empower the legend ability, because for some reason this deck does not have a lot of empowerment, we are left, unfortunately, in a position where in a grand sum of 10 minutes, this game has concluded with the Mel losing. It is, they tried their best, they genuinely did, because if we were to Wages of Pain this Lucian, the Lucian would die. The Z would now be a 3 on defense, allowing us to move in with the sprite, clearing off both those units, but unfortunately not enough. However, if the reverse was true, where instead of the Wages of Pain targeting that, they targeted their Fiora, and their Fiora didn't have a buff, and their Fiora did die, they would be able to move their sprite in, and then for the 3 they already technically paid for the Wages of Pain, they could not bring out the Kha'Zix, which would be needed to resolve this entire matter. And as such, there's no line in which the Fiora, the Mel can clear both battlefields. What's the next card? Rebuttal. You know, too late. Way too late. It needed to be seen on the draw of the Starcrossed, and that would have been beautiful to see. But unfortunately, it is not the way that was meant to happen. Oh, that's painful to see. What is the next 3 cards? Okay, what I was about to say, if it's a 3rd rebuttal, we're in dire straits. Did they play a single rebuttal? No. We saw a lot of the same cards, unfortunately. As for Kha'Zix, their next 5 cards were all really good as well. I think that this Kha'Zix list is incredibly powerful. If we move over to the mulligans and sideboard and we'll bring up those 2 lists, we can see, yeah, for this Mel, they're relying purely on their Mel Chosen Champion and the Mel Newly Awakened for empower triggers in order to actually benefit from using the Mel Legend. As for the Kha'Zix, they're seeing such a wide range of opportunities through this deck and playstyle. It's a lot easier to pick up and play from the get-go. They've got a nice table of contents. Actually, wow, they've got a very in-depth table of contents. So if you are interested in picking up Kha'Zix, this looks like a really, really nice list to begin playing. Obviously, Rengar Trophy Hunter will put you back a tiny penny, but that's okay. As for the Mel, no guide, nothing. I would like to see some commentary regarding the lack of empowerment, whether they are truly relying purely on the Mel Chosen Champion, but then they need to have some way to benefit that. But otherwise, I see some interesting aspects in this. I see some incredible aspects in this. I will be very interested to see where they go from here. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.